I still think, but I'm a lot less curious in that I figure if God wants me to know, he'll show me, he'll tell me. I don't have to go and search it all out. Whereas I would have done a lot of searching things out before. I want to know about this, so I'm going to go and search it out. And occasionally, there's interesting things out there in the world, and there's nothing wrong finding out about them. But there's, why do I need to know? That was the issue. What is my motivation to need to know? And for me, my need to know was based in, well, my identity is based in, I can explain things to other people and teach them. And if I don't know, I can't teach them. So it was an issue of, well, who are you?
Well, it seems like a lot of us are going through a lot of hard times lately. It's, just like I was in a car accident, and but God, my son and I were in the car, and God allowed us to stay, very calm and that. And I was just listening to someone, and he was saying how he's a preacher, and he was in an accident, and the way he reacted, the police officer couldn't believe it, because he was going and praying for everyone in the vehicle, the grandmother and and he sat in the car and tried to calm down the granddaughter that was in the back seat, and just loved on her and stuff. And it was a brand new truck he was driving that they just didn't see, and T-boned him and destroyed his truck. And the grandmother's in the front seat, and she's just panicking. She says, "That's a new truck. The driver's going to be furious." And she was panicking. And the guy said, he says, "I'm the driver." He says, so she just fell into him, collapsed, because she realized that, he wasn't angry, he didn't. And so it just, and then he's, he was saying that it's the only time you'd have a chance to be sometimes with these people. And he said, and he's so joyous, and that he just exudes joy wherever he goes. And the police officer ended up, he hated church. He hated Christians because he was molested as a child as a Christian. So he just rejected everyone.
Yeah.
Christian. So, just because of this gentleman, he ended up going to a church service because he found out he was ill, terminally ill or something. So he stepped into a church for the first time, and wouldn't you know it, that was the guy that was at the church service doing a healing service. So God just is amazing how he orchestrates our lives, and and we can touch other people. So I just thought that, wow, if I'd reacted differently, then what is my witness if I just get agitated and upset with people when bad things seem to fall into our lap or happen to us?
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a difficult thing because sometimes you're in shock and sometimes you react in the immediate. But ultimately, I guess, looking at it from a perspective of, if we're living in peace and dwelling in peace, and we've got God's presence with us, and we know that presence all the time, then that his presence can overcome the difficult things that we're facing or the shock that we might have in a situation like that. And of course, if someone comes and, rams into your car, immediately you're either going to, if you're not injured, you're either going to be shocked, angry, whatever. But it's that point where you take captive the thought. And I think God can help us to stay and remain in peace. Like Jesus in the eye of the storm, in the midst of a hurricane, if you like, he was in the spot where it was the eye, and therefore everything was peaceful, even though it wasn't peaceful in actuality, but for him it was. And I think each of us learned that, and I think we can get better at it. in that we might not be as good at it a few times it happens for various reasons, but actually when we see God can bring good out of a situation, even though at the time it doesn't appear that that's true, then I think we've learned to trust that he will bring good out of the next situation or the next situation if we trust him, and if we don't try and get in the way of it or try and control it. And I think sometimes we don't know the good that is ahead. We can just find the difficulty at the time, but ultimately God promises never to leave us or forsake us, and he does promise that we can cast all our burdens and cares onto him because he cares for us. And I think that's where, you know, the trust comes in. It might not feel like it, and it might not be good, but the reality is it's better that no one died than one car was worse off the other or better off than the other. It's, you know, there are priorities when you come into these situations that you have to look at. And ultimately, yeah, insurance will pay for a new truck, but they won't actually bring someone back to life. You know, and that's when you sort of look at things, okay, you know, when you all said and good, it's like, you know, what is my situation compared to those who are living in war at the moment, or all of family, you know, all of that stuff is hard, you know, and it's relative because it's relative to your normal state of life. You know, when we normally live in our sort of Western society, you know, we're not facing war or that type of thing, you know, on a very regular basis, if ever in our lives. But when something happens, it's relative to our normal state of being, and you can't compare. And I think, yeah, when my mum used to say as a kid, when I didn't want to eat the food on my plate because it was like, you know, it's like, oh, there's people starving in Africa, you know. I'm like, well, let them starve. He's like, I don't like it. You know, go and send it over to them. That's what I used to say to her. Send it over to them then, yeah, when I was a kid. But ultimately, I know what she was saying, but she was trying to compare my situation to their situation. And you can't compare it in reality because it's what you live and what you're used to. And I think God wants us to, yes, to have a testimony in difficult situations that others can see and say, why are you peaceful? Or why can you forgive? And why can you? You know, because I wouldn't be able to do that. And, you know, you get stories like that. I remember I knew a couple who produced a little booklet on forgiveness. And it was a good booklet. But they lived it because their son, who was a police officer, was murdered, shot, dead. And they went on air because they were interviewed by the thing and, you know, looking for a story, no doubt. And their reaction was, look, we choose to forgive this person. You know, we forgive them. We're not going to hold it against them. You know, and that actually opened the door for lots of opportunities for them to be able to share their story, their testimony. And, you know, it didn't mean that they weren't sad, grieving, or didn't care. They did terribly, really, really going through that emotionally, but they knew God was with them and they were able to demonstrate the forgiveness that they'd received to someone who didn't deserve it. But then does anyone deserve it from the point of view of, you know, what have we done to deserve it? Nothing. It's free. It's grace. It's a restorative thing. And restorative justice doesn't mete out retribution and revenge. It actually chooses to forgive in an unconditional way, as Jesus did on the cross. Father, forgive them. You know, it's like he was in the midst of being crucified to be able to say, Father, forgive them. You know, there weren't too many people who would have been able to do that. But he was able to do it because he was demonstrating a bigger picture for us in life that, hey, if I can choose to forgive and ask my Father to forgive those who are murdering me, then you can about anything. And I think that's the message. You know, forgiveness was such a heart of the gospel. And I think when you come to these things, testimonies are really important, you know, and the fact that this guy was able to put people at rest, at peace, you know, and calm the thing down was because he was coming from a place of knowing that calm and peace in his own life. You know, and I think that's the key. You know, the more we know the reality of that rest in our relationship with God, the more we trust God to deal with the issues that we face. And even though we don't understand, I think that's the key. Most people want to understand why. Why was in a car crash? Well, because someone was driving erratically. Well, why wasn't I unprotected? Well, you were. You're not dead. You got to look at. There's always a silver lining to the cloud if you wait long enough to find it. But you can live in the present as if that's already taken place because of the testimonies of previous experience. And we can live out of testimony to experience what we have previously experienced in the present, and also that will be what we will experience again in the future because we live in that moment. And it's not easy because emotions are involved. But in reality, what good is it getting angry, frustrated, annoyed? All it does is actually affect your own self, which, like someone said, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. And they don't. It affects us. It affects our well-being. Most people now accept that a lot of physical ailments are to do with emotional or mental situations in which unforgiveness, anger, those type of emotions can affect the body very negatively. And yet, when we come with a sense of gratitude and thanksgiving, it can actually program our body through our immune system to be healthy. So it is a very, very key position. And Jesus did say, my peace I leave you, not as the world. So it's not like we've got to generate it ourselves. It's something that he will give to us. And my joy is in you, so your joy can be full. All these things are something that he gives. Love one another as I've loved you. We don't have to generate the love or generate the joy or generate the peace. They come from our relationship with him because he is Prince of Peace. And from that perspective, for the joy set before him, he endured. And sometimes it feels like we're enduring because it's hard. But when we stay in that attitude of thanksgiving, even not thankful for what's happened, you're not going to be thankful for a car crash, but you can be thankful if no one died. You can be thankful for lots of different things, when you sort of set your heart towards that. I can always be thankful for what I have in God, no matter if everything else gets stripped away. And I think Paul talked about being content at all times, when he had everything and when he had nothing, because it wasn't depending on his circumstances. Happiness usually is, I'm happy because things are good. Joy is a deeper level because it isn't about the externals, about the internal. See, I can be joyful when the externals are not, because I'm drawing on the joy that's in me, which wasn't mine in the first place. I can receive that joy. I can receive that peace. I can receive that love and stay in rest because it's an internal, not an external thing. And I do think it is a good testimony when people see that we react and respond to situations differently than most people. But it's not easy. And sometimes you have to catch yourself and you have to remind yourself and you have to give yourself a bit of a shake up and say, okay, and get back to that state of joy and peace and love and stay in rest. Staying in rest is the key. And sometimes, you have to center yourself back on those things and look at the solution rather than the problem. Because God's always going to be the solution one way or another to every situation I faced, because he has got whatever I need to be able to handle, deal with in that situation can come from him. The joy of the Lord is our strength. So to be strong in a situation which is really difficult, joy, which doesn't come from us, but comes from drawing it out of him, actually can bring us to that place where we're able to still be joyful when maybe all around us aren't. But I don't feel like it sometimes, and that's when you've got to draw back, recenter, trust, and, don't try and understand it. If you understand it, you drive yourself crazy a lot of the times. And a lot of people want to know why. And you're not necessarily ever going to know why necessarily. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? I don't know. Is what I have to come to most of the time. I just have to say, I don't know. I don't understand, but I gave up the right to understand, 10 years ago, when I basically said, I surrender my need to understand and know. I'm going to trust you instead. I look back over those 10, 11 years, and there have been quite a number of situations that I really, really didn't understand. When some of my best friends betrayed me, when my wife left, all those things, it's like, I don't understand. Things happen with my children. I don't understand. And if I try and understand, then I'm trying to use human logic to figure something out, which will actually just bring me out of peace. So I trust rather than understand, and I trust that God is going to do something in a situation, even when I don't understand how he can, what he's going to do, why I'm in this situation in the first place, why it doesn't seem fair, all those things, the injustice. Injustice is a very powerful emotion that drives a lot of people. Well, it's not fair. It's not fair. I didn't do anything to deserve that. It's not fair. And, the world isn't fair. That's why, because it's not operating under heaven's government, primarily. It's operating under people who are doing their own thing. And a lot of people are operating out of their brokenness and lost identity, and they do things which are not what God will want them to do. And it's certainly not the best for them or anybody else, but they do them. And, I have to look at those things and I think, I don't understand. What am I going to do in this situation? I look around the world. You got war in Ukraine, you got war in Gaza, you got these terrible things going on. What am I going to do about it? Well, try and legislate for peace. That's all I can do. Unless I get a very specific thing from God to do, I look for peace. How can I administrate peace? Well, number one, don't take sides. Otherwise you're never going to administrate peace when you're taking sides. So you've got to remain neutral in a situation, which is very hard when it's affecting you in a negative way. And it is very hard. And being neutral sometimes is as much as you can be. It's really hard to be generous to those who are not being generous to you. And remaining neutral sometimes is like, okay, this is as much as I can do at the minute. But ultimately, God does ask us to love everybody, even those who would see themselves as our enemies or acting like our enemies, and to operate from his love. Because a lot of the time, I'm not really capable of loving the way he can love, but I have that love in me because he's in me. Love is in all of us. God is love. He dwells within us, and therefore there is a source of love which is beyond human comprehension, to be able to love others in a way which doesn't seem possible. But with God, all things are possible if we just start to put our trust in him and hold on sometimes. Just hold on and hang in there. And sometimes that's as much as you can do. And I've been in that situation a few times. And then it's like, how on earth am I going to navigate through this? And then I realized I don't have to. I just have to keep walking with him. And he'll walk me out of it eventually.
Mike, when you said that you gave up your right to understand,
yeah.
and knowing what you're like, you're pretty inquisitive. And
Yeah.
And it just kind of goes contrary to what your personality, your character is. And even in your recent situation with Debbie, you must be going through like, well, if I'd done this, I need to try this or try that. Where is that just a natural with you that it just flows like that? I know it's a natural with me.
Well, it is, but very quickly I can come back to a place where I realize, hey, that isn't going to do me any good. And yes, that when emotions kick in and when shock comes in and things happen and you don't understand, there is a sort of natural, what's going on? Why is this happening? But what I realized is, and what I think God was trying to teach me, 10, 11 years ago, when I went through a situation where I had to come to the end of myself and my need to know, because there's a difference between being curious and needing to know. I needed to know, I'm still curious. I'm still interested in life and things that happen. And, but I don't need to know. And I don't have to for God to give me the answers in that type of dynamic. Because, yes, he made me to want to understand things or be aware of things. And that's part of who I'm made. But I can't get my identity from that. That's what I gave up the right to, creating my own identity from what I knew, and therefore feeling better about myself when I particularly knew what God was doing. What are you doing? I want to know what you're doing. What's this about? And I had to get to the point where, okay, if I'd ever know what you're doing, I'm still going to trust you because I do. I will. I want to. And it became that way. And there's a difference between generally looking at the world, and for me, coming from a sort of prophet, teacher, redemptive gift scenario, to say, well, what's going on? Why is things like this? So that I might have an understanding to do something about it, to I need to know related to me. And so I gave up my right to need to know what God was doing in my life and replaced it with, I trust that you're good, and whatever you're doing, it must be what is best for me. So that was the dynamic. I still think, but I'm a lot less curious in that I figure if God wants me to know, he'll show me, he'll tell me. I don't have to go and search it all out. Whereas I would have done a lot of searching things out before. I want to know about this, so I'm going to go and search it out. And occasionally, there's interesting things out there in the world, and there's nothing wrong finding out about them. But there's, why do I need to know? That was the issue. What is my motivation to need to know? And for me, my need to know was based in, well, my identity is based in, I can explain things to other people and teach them. And if I don't know, I can't teach them. So it was an issue of, well, who are you? Based on, well, I do this. And of course, God made me that way, and he wanted me to be able to understand things and teach people about things, but not from a purely intellectual understanding. And I think back in 2010 to 12, I went from a shift from intellectual knowledge to experience, testimony, encounter, in that I wasn't then just explaining things from an intellectual perspective to people. I was sharing my experiences so that people could have their own experiences rather than rely on my explanation. So that shifted from, well, let me help you and let me tell you what's going on, to let me help you find an answer in God for what's going on, if he wants to give you one. So things changed in the way I did things. They changed in the way I thought about things. They very much changed in, I knew who I was because I knew that my relationship with God defined who I was, not what I did. So if I never did something again, that wouldn't stop me still being the same person. I'm still me, and I'm discovering who I am more and more all the time, and I'm becoming more aware of who I am all the time. Well, I had to give up my soul's right for the information that I needed to feel secure and safe. Because when I knew what God was doing, it's okay. Oh, that's okay. I understand. Might not have always been happy, but I understood. When I didn't know what I was doing, what God was doing, well, then I've got a choice. I need to know so I feel safe and secure, or I trust God that I'm safe and secure, even if I don't know. And I think that's where I got to within the dynamic of it. And, you know, the whole thing of free will and choice and everything else, it was like, I didn't want independent free will and choice. In reality, I've got it, but am I going to use it? Well, why would I want to use it? Why would I want to do anything outside of what God's best is for me or what his desire is for me? You know, only doing what I see the Father doing. Yeah, that's my desire. And ultimately, you know, that shifted when I got to the point where, okay, I yield and surrender my soul's right to understand, know, and my soul's right to its own independence. I don't want independence. You know, I don't want to do anything on my own, independently from God. You know, I have the right to, if I want to, but I know it's not going to serve me any good purpose. Being independent from God, I'm on my own. Whereas if I'm in union with God, it's like I have all the resources of creation at my disposal in one sense. So it sort of brought me to the point where, you know, it was a point of surrender in a things of giving up the things that I do have a right to, because I realized that my right to them doesn't help me. You know, so I chose to be a living sacrifice, not because he made me or forced me, but because I wanted to. You know, I wanted him to transform my life and heal me and make me whole and change me and bring me into union. I wanted him to do it, and I didn't have to understand how he was going to do it, you know, unless he wanted me to. Now, there are quite a lot of times in my life where he's told me amazing things, you know, and explained awesome things to me, not because I needed that, but because he wanted to, so that when someone asked me a question, I would be able to give them some sort of answer, you know, more for the benefit of others than for myself, you know. But it's not like God wanted to keep things from me. He just didn't want me dependent on those things to give me a sense of self-worth, value, identity from being the person who knows stuff, you know. And that was a huge change, you know. And I think all of us have to get to a point in our life where he can separate our soul and spirit, and he can reintegrate us, and he can make us whole, and we can flow from the inside out to become in union, spirit, soul, and body. And I think I value my body more now than I did back then. You know, I didn't really think about it particularly, but now I want to look after myself. I want to treat myself with respect because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And if I don't treat myself with respect, why would anybody else? You know, but I know because I know God does, and I know God loves me. So I think my value and worth come from the relationship rather than from my success or what I'm doing or works or any of those things which are me validating myself with what I do, you know. And I think that's what changed big time when I got to that point of, okay, I surrender, I give up, I don't need to know anymore, I trust you. No, that's been put to the test in my life quite a lot since, but quickly I found that I can trust him, even though you get into a point where, oh, what's going on, why is this happening? And you know, I'm not immune to asking the question or feeling the sort of sense of this doesn't feel fair or whatever. I'm not immune to that, but I can choose not to let that affect how I am for very long. And we all got emotions, so you have to deal with the emotions. Well, how do I deal with my emotions? Well, generally I hand them over to him. It's like, okay, this is how I'm feeling, God, help. I'm feeling like this. But then I know that even asking the question or making the statement gives me a point of, oh yeah, I don't need to feel like this. Because actually I know there is something better than that by staying in peace and joy and love, in rest. All who are weary, heavy laden, come to him and find rest. So it's a choice to come. And I think that choice is to come every single time. Because we do have that choice. How do we deal with every situation that we face? I have a choice. I can handle it in my own way. I can handle it independently. I can handle it maybe how I've handled it before, or I can trust that he will help me to handle it the way he would want me to handle it in any situation. And I can't assume that that will be the same way I handled it the last time, because maybe he's got a different way of handling it this time. So I've got to be reliant and dependent on him guiding me through the process and not making assumptions, because it's very easy to make an assumption of how I should handle a situation, and then I'm doing it actually independently if I'm making an assumption, because it's like, well, I don't really need you, God, in this situation because I know how to deal with this. Well, actually, maybe the way I was going to deal with it might be not the best way of dealing with it in that situation. Might have been okay the last time I dealt with something, but now I want to be guided through a process of helping me come to a point of staying in that place of rest without assuming and without being arrogant about it. Oh yeah, I'm at rest, I'm okay. Well, every situation requires me to enter into that rest. I may be at rest, but I might be very much disturbed by something that happens. And then it's a question of, well, what am I going to do now? And I found that the best thing I can do is come to him. Even though, of course, it's not easy. And some things are terrible that happen in life, and there are all sorts of things that go on, and there are things that are going on in the world right now. And, I get asked questions about them. I think, oh, do I want to give another answer to this question? And it's like, okay, well, but if someone needs the answer, who am I not to try and help them in that situation with an answer? And sometimes I don't have categoric black and white answers, because most of the things I have to share is, well, you're going to get the answer and you know where you're going to get it. You're actually going to get it within your relationship with God, because Jesus is the truth, who can give you insight, but don't necessarily expect to understand and know everything in life. Because ultimately that would put us in the position that we would be God if we knew everything, and I realize I'm definitely not that. So ultimately I'm sort of learning to hand situations to God and recenter and enter rest more quickly when I get disturbed or things disturb your rest or peace. It's like being woken up in the middle of the night and then not being able to go back to sleep because your head's going round and round and round. Well, I had to learn how to go back to sleep when you get woken up every night. Every sort of parent probably learns that when they got kids. I learned that because I used to work on call. So I was woken up, had to get up, do something, and go back to sleep. So I sort of learned how to be able to navigate through that. But in life, situations happen that disturb you. Then you've got to handle those situations, as God gives you the insight and the wisdom to do so, really, which is not easy. It isn't, but it is possible. to learn to do it quicker. You know, because if you had no emotions, you wouldn't be human. God doesn't want us to be oblivious to things that go on or not to feel anything. You know, we need to empathize. We need to be able to sympathize. We need to be able to feel other people and be aware of what other people are going through so that we can comfort or encourage or help when we can. You know, so God doesn't want us to be, you know, emotionless robots. And if you have emotions, you know, someone once said, I know it was, it's like emotions are a good servant and a bad master. If they control us, they're not healthy. If they are helpful to us, they are. And they're given to us so we feel. You know, and I don't want to be unfeeling and sort of, oh, I'm okay, everything's wonderful, everything's always wonderful, you know, and go through life not actually having emotions. You know, I had from a lot of my life, I didn't really deal with things emotionally. You know, when I got hurt as a teenager and I shut my emotions down and I vowed not to be hurt again, I became very, very thick-skinned and very unemotional, in that I just didn't let things affect me because I closed my emotions down as a protection mechanism to protect myself from further hurt. So that's how I was. Now, I saw that as a really good strength. It's like, hey, nothing really affects me. I can just go through life, you know, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, you're closing down an area of your life that God has given you to be able to enjoy. So I found it really difficult to actually have the good emotions. You know, no one wants the bad ones really, but actually emotions are emotions. You can't determine, well, I only want good emotions, so I don't want any bad ones. Emotions are emotions. You know, so although I was very, very level, I didn't have any ups and I didn't have any downs. So I was very level, but it was like that wasn't how God intended me to be. And ultimately, when I got some ministry later on in life, it changed how I felt. And then I was open to feel again. And in feeling again, the first things I felt were hurt, anger, annoyance. I didn't feel any of the nice emotions to start with. Just a whole lot of bad ones came out, and I didn't know how to handle them because I hadn't dealt with them for years and years and years. So I handled them really badly, you know. And it's like, but fortunately, the people around me knew what I was going through, so they had some grace for me for a while. But then I sort of balanced them out in that I was also able to feel the good emotions to a higher level because that's normal life. You know, I wasn't living a normal life. I was living a suppressed life. You know, and some people, I guess, might be happy living a suppressed life, but then you don't actually have the joy, the real sense of joy and peace. You know, so ultimately, when that sort of healing came to my emotions and I went through the process of dealing, why I closed things down, the vows that I made, how that had affected my life, and went through a forgive and release process of forgiving and releasing people who had contributed to that, you know, and choosing to forgive myself for making the vows in the first place and doing all that, then my emotions began to become more healthy. But that means that you have to choose to manage them and not let them control you, because that becomes dangerous. Then if you allow your emotions to control you, then you can do things from anger or from those feelings that you're feeling, rather than, well, what is the right thing to do here? You know, how can I operate in this, even though I'm feeling this? How can I choose not to take revenge or look for retribution or do those sort of emotions that you know, when you have, you know. And again, God took me through a process in my life where he actually showed me how to work through what happened when I was feeling something. And often it would be trauma, that triggered it. Something happened. Why am I feeling this? What triggered that emotion? And, I went through and I produced a teaching around trauma to transformation. Because actually I saw that if I was reflective and I could reflect on why I felt the way I did, or why I reacted the way I did, or why I responded the way I did, what was triggering those emotions, and why were those emotions automatic and not a choice, I was able then to go through a process that God showed me. Look, ask yourself these questions. Look at what triggered that. Was it a memory of a previous experience? Was it an unforgiven situation that you didn't forgive something that happened before when you experienced that? What was those things? What were they in your life that caused you to, in this situation, feel the way you felt? And some of those emotions were fear. Why was I afraid? Embarrassment, insecurity, as well as anger and other emotions, frustration and things. And so he taught me to be more self-reflective, to ask myself the question, why? Now, for most of the stuff in life, it's pretty petty and doesn't really matter too much. But once you start replaying a situation in your head, and you start replaying the situation, well, I wish I'd said this, and wish I had time over again, I would say that, and I would argue this, and I would do that, and you start getting emotional, and then you start reliving the anxiety and the feelings of the trauma of what happened. And fortunately, God blessed me by taking me through a process and showing me, because I was replaying my annoyance about someone who'd made an accusation and accused me of stuff, and I got angry with them and responded out of that anger and all of that. And then I was like, playing it over and playing over what the person said and how unjust is that? And I don't know how much I've done, it's just going on in my head. This is a conversation. And then it's almost like God said, shut up. Listen to yourself, thinking, what's going on? So he then taught me a process that I could apply if I was ever in a situation where what I was feeling, I was rehearsing and playing it over and, and feeling annoyed or anxious or frustrated or whatever it was in the situation. So I learned, and then he showed me not everything in your life you have to be good at. And to start with, that was a bit of a shock, because it was like, well, if I have a weakness, don't you want me to be better and stronger? And it's like, well, not if you don't need to be. Why do you need to be good at that if you're not supposed to be doing that? What a waste of time learning to be good at something where you never need to use. And so I took that to heart, and I then changed my attitude towards certain things I was doing, and certain things I was doing because no one else wanted to do them. And I wasn't doing them better, as good as other people could have done them if I hadn't have been doing them. So I decided not to do certain things. And then other people had to step into those roles and do them better than I could do them. So I accepted that reality was God didn't want me to do stuff like that. So I don't need to be better at that. So, I passed on duties to other people. But my first reaction was, in the argument or conversation I was having, was, well, you do it then. If you're better, if you think you can do it better than me. And I wasn't coming out of a right attitude or a right emotion. I was coming out of annoyance. But actually, God showed me that was actually the best thing that could happen in the situation. So the person who accused me in this situation of not doing my job properly and not being very good at it in certain roles, I basically resigned from those roles and gave him the role. and actually did it with the right heart and attitude in the end, because I actually realized that he probably could do a much better job than I could, which was why he was frustrated with me in the first place, because he could see how to do things better than I could. I was doing my best, but I was doing something because no one else really wanted to do it. He was much better at doing those things. See, I'm not really in the redemptive gift scale. I'm not really ruler gift. I had to learn to take on a leadership ruler role. It's not really what I wanted to do, or really sort of my nature. I'm quite happy going along and just doing my own thing generally. You know, I don't need to be leading. But actually, I was put into a role where leadership was part of it. And a lot of leadership was part of it in lots of different situations. So I had to learn how to do it. You know, but my instinctive thing is to understand things and, you know, be prophet teacher in it rather than ruler. You know, so, you know, actually, over the years, I've stepped back more and more and more from those type of roles until right now, I don't have any, I don't think. Well, one, when I probably had about 7 or 8 different roles that were all really leadership ruling roles. And now actually that role is a creative role rather than a leadership role, you know, which is much more how I feel about myself in terms of being creative in that way. So, you know, a lot of, you know, you learn in life, and there are a lot of situations that God takes you through to get you to the place where you can just be comfortable being you.
Mike, you said you've come to a stage where now your internal peace overpowers everything around. The external circumstances don't matter. And
well, it's not that they don't matter, it's just they're in the right perspective.
Yeah.
You know, they're put into the right perspective in that they're not going to control me or affect me in a way that stops me being able to stay in peace.
Correct. And so then you come to a stage where you give up the right. You make a choice of not wanting to know why this is happening to you. And so you can be at peace with God and your relationship with Him. Am I defining that correctly?
Yeah, well, yeah. I get to the point where I don't need to know. Doesn't mean I don't want to know. I think we all want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't need to trust God.
And so
I needed to know, because then I trusted Him, because I really didn't need to trust Him until I knew. And there's a huge difference in that, you know.
So I wondered if He explained to me, would I understand? Because His reasons are so different. And so you look at the book of Job. When God starts to explain, there are so many things like the circle of the deep and all that He refers to. We'll never know when God connects all the events in our lives, and it's always for the good. And a lot of times we'll never know when it's good and when it's bad for us. And so Job's friends also try to explain to him, and it's in the end, it doesn't make any sense. They have all the good intentions, you know, but in the end, it's God has other plans, and God's ways are different. I tried to actually, when I found out what was happening to Bill, you know, the prosperity gospel is kind of like equates what we do with our external circumstances also. So if you do this and do this, and this is going to happen. Yeah. In Bill's life, all of us said, now Bill has gone through enough. The circumstances in his life, and like, wow, now it's going to be like God is going to, you know, pour out His goodness in him. And then we find out that his childhood house is gone. And like, we were numb. I was numb for a couple of days. So like, what do I say to Bill? In these circumstances? Only God has the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can feel compassion, and that compassion obviously will motivate you to want to give an answer. or to help in whatever way you can. But ultimately, there are no easy answers. I mean, I don't know the circumstances of your house burning down or how it did or why it did or whatever else. But the reality is it must be horrible, to lose that and to lose everything in that sense or whatever was situation. A lot of Christians in that scenario, well, we've been taught to almost give platitudes to it. It's almost like, well, and yeah, you can understand that. Well, at least you're still alive, and you didn't die in the fire or whatever, all that stuff. You sort of come up with things to almost try and look on the bright side, but actually it's a really, really sad thing. It must be terrible to feel that and to go through that. And I've not gone through that in my life in that sort of way, but I can obviously feel for you and feel compassion for you in the sense of, and say, whatever I can do, I can do. But ultimately, trying to give easy answers isn't the best thing to do in it, is it? I guess for you, it's to know, well, at least some people are there for me, or, they care, and caring, is sort of showing, I guess, that in some way as God leads. And I think that's the key. What does God want us to do in every situation? And that's not always the obvious thing to do, or our knee-jerk reaction thing to do. It's like, when someone loses somebody and they die, I find it really difficult to know what to do in that situation. So generally I give someone a hug, and cry with them, because sometimes it's like you just don't know, well, what can I do in this situation? But actually just being there is probably all you can do, and not try and explain or all that sort of stuff. But it is feeling, and it must be for you guys, the stuff you shared over the previous couple of times we met. It's like, oh, what more? And I can understand that, how that would be, might be how you feel and how you feel about it. And it's horrible that that's happened, and I sort of, when you sort of contact me, I thought, oh, this is terrible, but, immediately I'm thinking, well, hopefully no one was hurt, and that's the first thing you sort of think about. But it doesn't lessen the impact emotionally of loss. Loss is quite a powerful emotion that, you have to go through, because just because things are inanimate, that doesn't mean that there aren't huge emotional attachments to them. Whether they be pets or things that we own or other things, a house carries all the memories of the house and the emotions that go with that and all of that. So there's huge, emotions that can be attached to something that we've had, some place we've lived, all of that dynamic. So, you can't lessen that. Therefore, it's okay to grieve. We don't just grieve over people. We can grieve over the loss of anything. Because actually that is a natural reaction to loss, is to grieve, is to be sorrowful. But within it, know that he carries our griefs and sorrows. And I think that's all, all I can do when I get to that point of is, okay, I don't understand. And you promised to carry my grief and sorrows, so here, take them. But that doesn't mean they disappear. It just means that the burden and the weight of them he shares, so that we can get through a situation without it debilitating us to such a degree that we can't function. But I don't know how you feel. I can imagine how you feel, but I don't know how you feel, because I've never lost something like that big, in a sense, in my life. But, I've things I have lost, and I can imagine sort of what loss feels like to you. But I would say, don't lessen it or try and do, but embrace the loss and grieve over it. But let him help you in that grief process to process, because it is process. And I think takes time. Process is always a time orientated thing. And I don't think you can short circuit that and take a shortcut to it, because it takes as long as it takes. But don't let it take a second longer than it needs to take. That's the key in it. Don't get dragged down into it. Grieve, be sorrowful, and then you come to a point where your emotions begin to be restored, and you get over the loss and the hurt and the pain in a situation, but it's horrible. I do feel, for you in it, because, you had enough already. That's it feels like, isn't it? It's like enough already. Yeah,
it's like we've had one thing after the other. It's boom, 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 right? And that's what makes it even harder, because this year has been kind of a year from hell for us.
But you know what the good thing is? I think if I hadn't moved on from where I'd been, say, in traditional Christianity, I'd be searching myself saying, I've done something wrong. And I've never gone that route.
no,
And I've looked at it, well, you've got lordship over everything, so you're looking after it.
Yeah. And I think that's the case. It's like, we mustn't look at things in our lives and blame ourselves.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to people because we live in a world which is broken, which is not perfect. But ultimately, we want it to be. That is what restoration is all about. We want everything back to the restored state that God always wanted it to be. The only way that can happen is if people change, ultimately. Generally speaking, it's
part of the path of maturity too, isn't it? He's maturing us through these things.
Yeah.
And no one wants to go through it, but it's just part of the process, as you would say.
Yeah, it's I look back in my life and I actually look at and see some of the most traumatic times actually brought about the biggest change.
Yeah.
Now, I would have not asked God to bring about the change that way. But if you're asking him to change you all the time and transform you and making me more like him, then when something happens and it brings about change, it's like, well, I didn't want you to do it that way. Well, all I have to do is say, well, okay, I trust that must have been the only way, or the best way. Even though for me, it's like, couldn't you have found a more kind way of doing it? But he didn't do it. You see, that's the thing. That's sort of attributing the sovereignty of God. Well, if something happened, it must have been God that did it.
Yeah.
No, God doesn't do those things, but he can take advantage of those things and bring good out of them, which is generally our maturity and our change and our transformation. And over time, you look back and you look at all the events, and I do look and think, I learned so much through that difficult scenario. I learned to trust. I learned to forgive. I learned to help other people in it. I learned a lot. And well, look, do I wish that never happened? Well, if I didn't get the results from it, I guess, well, yeah, I wish it never happened. But actually, I can't say I would go through the situations again for the results that have come out of those situations, generally speaking. And some situations are, well, someone dies or you go through that. It's a sad thing. And, but I still have learned for him to carry my griefs and sorrows in it. So it's life is not always as God intended. Most of the time it's not as God actually intended it to be, but he's with us in it to bring about ultimately a restoration eventually. And, you know, when you find new mercies every morning, those mercies can be applied to yesterday's situations so that yesterday's situations don't have to be piled onto today's situations. You know, it's like I found that the memory of yesterday has less and less effect on me the more and more I embrace mercy. And therefore, it doesn't mean that I don't remember them, but the memory of them doesn't trigger a continual reprocessing the same emotion and feelings. So I know things happened to me and things have happened, but the impact of them is much lessened when I realize that mercy is applied to them. And therefore, wisdom is embracing what happened and the learning that comes from it, but without the trauma attached to it. So the negative emotions can be restored through mercy. And I found that has been something I've learned to understand in my life a lot more, that God's mercy triumphs.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, what you went through a few years ago far exceeds anything I have ever gone through in my life. Combined it all together by a multiple of at least 100, because that was an entire unraveling of your entire life over the last 35, 40 years. It had to be so tough, emotion, everything that was tied in. It was just, I can't imagine what you went through.
But I guess, you know, it's all relative to each of us.
Yeah.
You know, and for you, what you're going through is probably equally as traumatic as that for me. You know, it's just, it's sort of, I don't think we can compare with each other. We just need to recognize that for some people, a small thing to me will be a big thing to them. And therefore, I can't show compassion on the basis of how it would affect me.
Yeah.
You know, and I can see, you know, I remember, because I've ministered a lot of people over the years, and some very seemingly trivial things have had a huge effect in someone's life. But it had a huge effect on their life. And I can't minimize the effect by looking at what it shouldn't have done. You shouldn't have let that affect you that way. It did. You know, therefore, I'm going to minister to the reality of the situation, not how I would have dealt with that situation if it had happened to me. You know, and so minor things can have a major effect on people's lives. You know, therefore, I need to treat that person through the effect of what that's happened to them, not on judging them for their reaction to a situation. You know, and that's where I think, you know, having compassion is treating the person hopefully the way God would treat them in a situation. And God doesn't judge us for things like that. You know, he is merciful. He cares. And he wants to express that in the way in which he can restore and make us whole and bring us into a place of health and healing in our lives. But it doesn't make it any easier going through it, you know. You know, he doesn't make emotional situations easy because they hurt, you know, that they're painful, you know, but then they're also great joy that we also experience in our emotions, that is sort of almost like emotions are neutral. They can be really good and really hurtful, but they are emotions. And if you take the one away, then you take the other away, which is what happened to me in my life. You know, when I took away the ability to be hurt, I also took away the ability to really feel, you know, and feel the real joy as well. You know, so I'd much rather have healthy emotions that can handle either the pain or the celebration of the joy than just be level, you know, because sometimes there are ups and sometimes there are downs. But in it, God is still the same, and learning to draw on him in the down times is really, really how I think we do mature, you know. as well as celebrating with him in the good times and the up times, and being thankful and being grateful and being joyful in those times when we've got a lot to rejoice about. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. We really appreciate you taking the time. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.